Most men operating at our level make the same fundamental miscalculation when assessing systemic risk. We assume our accumulated wealth, the digits on a Vanguard statement, the stack of physical gold, the liquid cash reserves, acts as a bulletproof shield. In an era defined by macroeconomic stability, that assumption held true. Cash bought priority. But we are not analyzing stability. We are dissecting the anatomy of a localized infrastructure fracture. Look at the paper currency in your wallet right now. In the first 72 hours of a supply chain paralysis, that currency undergoes an aggressive involuntary devaluation. It doesn't lose value because of inflation. It loses utility because the mechanism to exchange it for life-sustaining assets has evaporated. When the shelves are stripped bare, fiat currency cannot materialize an over-the-counter fever reducer at midnight. A $100 bill cannot be burned to charge the 1% battery remaining on your phone when the grid goes dark. I have watched crowds meticulously calculate the volume of their financial assets, yet I have rarely seen anyone calculate the exact window of time they can exist completely decoupled from the system. This brings us to a critical data point that most mainstream analysts comfortably ignore. The U.S. Energy Information Administration's updated metrics for 2024 revealed a sobering reality. The average American endured 11 hours without power. That is not an anomaly. That is nearly double the average of the preceding decade. It is a mathematical indicator of structural exhaustion. The macroscopic blade is an aging electrical grid buckling under peak demand or targeted disruption. The microscopic slash, the one that draws blood, is sitting in your home at hour 3, watching your communication devices die, realizing your electric stove is a useless metallic box, and knowing that your checking account balance is completely irrelevant to the immediate survival of your family. What you're buying when you secure decentralized capability isn't just a water filter or a butane stove. You're purchasing a very specific, highly illiquid asset, time buffer. You're buying the privilege of not standing in a 3-hour line fueled by collective desperation. You're buying distance from the crowd. And the crowd, operating within a distribution system that was never designed for them to panic simultaneously, is about to discover a devastating engineering flaw in the modern American supply chain. That devastating flaw isn't a temporary glitch. It is the exact algorithm that built the modern retail empire. We are witnessing the terminal stage of the just-in-time era, a global distribution architecture optimized ruthlessly to eliminate warehouse storage and maximize corporate profit margins. The shelves at your local grocery store and the subterranean tanks at your corner gas station are not designed to hold reserves. They are calibrated to a mathematical algorithm of steady, predictable, frictionless daily consumption. To understand why this system collapses, we must abandon academic economic terms and look at physical physics. Imagine the entire municipal supply chain as a physical funnel. If you pour 10 gallons of water through that funnel steadily over a 7-day period, the flow is flawless. That represents normal distributed consumer demand. But when millions of households panic and attempt to pour those exact same 10 gallons through the funnel in a single second, the water doesn't disappear, the funnel itself doesn't shatter, but the water violently overflows, the mechanism chokes, and suddenly, nobody gets a single drop. Economists call this a throughput bottleneck. I call it structural gridlock. I find it fascinating that men who rigorously stress test their investment portfolios never bother to stress test the logistical arteries feeding their own neighborhoods. The latest intelligence from Gartner confirms this severe vulnerability. 63% of global supply chains are currently classified as fragile. They possess zero elasticity. They will fracture immediately under synchronized pressure because they are calibrated for a perfect world that no longer exists. When that synchronized demand spike hits, the microscopic slash is profound. The threat isn't that the municipal treatment plant has run out of water. The threat is that aging infrastructure is compromised, boil advisories are issued while your stove has no power, and you are forced to compete with 10,000 neighbors for a finite shelf of bottled water. You bypass this entirely only if you have secured a verified physical water filtration system, gravity-fed or pump action, decoupling your family's hydration from the city's failing grid. And let me address a dangerous piece of fiction circulating among amateur survivalists: the illusion that you can secure true autonomy for under $20 a category. A $15 headlamp is a convenience, not a systemic backup. If you intend to keep a medical monitor running, maintain a router for critical open source intelligence, and power LED lighting for consecutive days of darkness, you require a high-capacity portable power station. The market reality for a unit possessing the lithium density to actually sustain your household operations at hour 12 is between $150 and $300. True independence requires strategic capital deployment, not pocket change. Preparation that stops one step before completion isn't preparation. It is a false sense of security. And the collapse of this just-in-time architecture isn't just a modern theoretical model. It is a mathematical certainty that has already suffocated an entirely different demographic just a few years ago. look back at the United States infant formula crisis of 2022. I find it remarkable how quickly the public memory erases the mechanics of a disaster the moment the immediate pain subsides. The mainstream media framed it as a production tragedy, but it was nothing of the sort. There was no sudden catastrophic global shortage of dairy or chemical nutrients. The raw materials existed. What actually occurred was a textbook demonstration of a single-point failure detonating within a hypersensitive just-in-time ecosystem. One major facility, the Abbott plant, went offline due to contamination protocols. In a resilient economy built with redundant storage and structural fat, the loss of one node is absorbed by the network. But our system has been methodically stripped of all excess fat to appease shareholder quarterly reports. The moment news of the shutdown leaked, millions of parents made the highly rational individual decision to stockpile whatever inventory remained. But, as we established with the physical funnel, millions of rational individual decisions executed simultaneously create an irrational, catastrophic mathematical outcome. The throughput bottlenecks slammed shut. For months, upper-middle-class families with significant disposable income stood in the aisles of premium supermarkets, staring at empty metal shelving, entirely incapable of exchanging their wealth for a basic survival necessity. The global manufacturing capacity was largely intact, but the physical delivery mechanism was shattered by the sheer velocity of localized panic. This isn't an isolated anomaly. It is an immutable mathematical law of modern commerce. I observed this exact behavioral cascade in early 2020, though the focal point was trivial. The supply chain was overwhelmed by a synchronized panic for toilet paper. Manufacturing was running, trucks were moving, but the retail restock cycle simply could not process the mathematical spike in demand. Lacking paper products is a discomfort, but it exposed the precise blueprint of how our distribution grid fails. Now, apply that exact mathematical equation to resources carrying actual life or death weight. Consider basic over-the-counter analgesics, fever reducers, or pediatric antibiotics. When a crisis signals, these are the categories that evaporate in hours. The microscopic slash here is brutal. Under normal conditions, an 11 p.m. fever is an uncomfortable evening solved by a quick drive to a 24-hour pharmacy. Under disrupted conditions, when the shelves have been stripped by panicked neighbors, that same unmedicated fever extends across multiple days, slowly degrading the psychological and physical endurance of your entire household. The biological illness didn't mutate into a deadlier strain. Your logistical capacity to mitigate it simply dropped to zero. We survived the formula shortage and the paper goods panic because those were isolated fractures confined to specific aisles. But the equation changes entirely when the stress test isn't applied to a single product line. What happens when the crushing mathematical pressure is applied to the very foundation that allows those delivery trucks to move in the first place? The variables are aligning, and a massive geopolitical shockwave is currently propagating toward our domestic supply lines, one that converges on a very specific date. That specific date is May 1st, 2026. We are not looking at a theoretical modeling of a supply chain disruption. We are tracking a highly visible convergence of geopolitical tectonic plates. To understand what is about to happen to the shelves in your local zip code, you have to look at the macroeconomic pressure building overseas. By May 1st, the United Arab Emirates officially finalizes its withdrawal from the OPEC Plus alliance. This is not a standard bureaucratic policy shift. It is a structural rupture in global energy management. The UAE's exit dismantles the cartel's engineered pricing floor, introducing violent volatility into forward contract purchasing. Simultaneously, we are watching Japan execute Phase 2 of its National Petroleum Reserve release. A sovereign nation does not dump its strategic survival reserves into the open market unless their intelligence apparatus sees a catastrophic supply squeeze on the horizon. Now, compound those two massive variables with the kinetic instability happening right now. We have Iran actively engineering choke points in the Persian Gulf, manipulating maritime insurance premiums to paralyze tankers. In our own hemisphere, the political detonation following the arrest of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela has severed the export of a heavy sour crude, the exact specific grade of crude that our Gulf Coast refineries require for blending and optimal processing. We can pump all the light, sweet crude we want in Texas, but without the heavy crude to balance the refining process. Domestic gasoline production bottlenecks. Think of the global energy supply chain as a massive, high-pressure pipeline. These overlapping geopolitical events do not instantly drain every drop of oil from the earth. Instead, they inject massive, volatile kinetic pressure, what we call a geopolitical risk premium, into the pipeline. When that pressure wave hits the fragile terminal valves of our domestic retail networks, the system violently shudders to recalibrate pricing and allocate sparse inventory. And this external pressure is colliding with a domestic infrastructure that is already bleeding. I find it staggering how few Americans are aware of the undeclared war occurring on their own soil. The Department of Energy and Checkpoint Research recently documented a chilling statistic. Over the past year, there were 175 targeted physical attacks on the U.S. power grid, alongside a 70% spike in cyber intrusions targeting utility control systems. Our homeland grid is already deeply compromised. The geopolitical shockwave arriving in May is simply the final rotational force needed to snap the rusted bolts. This brings us to the absolute apex of systemic vulnerability. The master variable, fuel. Most people categorize fuel as just another commodity, something alongside food, water, or batteries. That is a fatal miscategorization. Fuel is not a commodity. It is the master key. It is the underlying operating system of your physical autonomy. Every single preparation, every piece of equipment, and every tactical decision you make is entirely subordinate to your ability to move. The geopolitical blade is swinging in the Persian Gulf and Caracas, but the microscopic slash happens on a Tuesday morning in your quiet suburb. You pull up to your corner station, assuming the algorithm of daily life is intact, but the digital pumps are dark, wrapped in yellow caution tape. The underground tanks were drained in 6 hours by a synchronized panic you slept through. In that exact fraction of a second, your $80,000 luxury SUV instantly transforms into a useless 5,000-pound metal paperweight sitting idle in your garage. Without fuel, you cannot drive across town to acquire the pediatric antibiotics your family desperately needs. You cannot transport a critically wounded family member when emergency services are paralyzed. You cannot evacuate a deteriorating urban center when the local infrastructure collapses. Your radius of survival, which you arrogantly assumed was 300 miles, instantly and violently compresses to the exact distance you can walk carrying a backpack. I watch intelligent men assume they can simply fill up when things start looking bad. That is the supreme illusion. By the time a disruption signal is broadcast loudly enough for the general public to react, the mathematical throughput bottleneck has already slammed shut. The station is empty, the lines stretch for miles, and the psychological degradation of the crowd has already begun. A half-empty tank on the wrong afternoon doesn't just stop your commute, it liquidates your options, all of them, simultaneously. This is why maintaining your vehicle's fuel level above the halfway mark at all times is not a suggestion. It is a mandatory, non-negotiable protocol for anyone serious about asset protection. It is the cheapest, most effective insurance policy on Earth. It entirely removes you from the mathematical bottleneck. While the rest of the city burns hours in a desperate, volatile line, fighting for the last dregs of a broken distribution network, you are not there. You are already home, secured, and operating independently of the panic. The panic is a mathematical certainty, but your participation in it is entirely optional. The gap between recognizing a systemic vulnerability and losing the ability to patch it does not close over a period of months. It closes in a matter of hours. It does not close because a geopolitical shockwave physically destroys your local supermarket. It closes because an invisible threshold of public concern is crossed, triggering the synchronized demand spike we have dissected today. When millions of people simultaneously realize they require the exact same $20 propane canister, the $15 pack of AA batteries, or the basic pediatric fever reducer, those items cease to be retail commodities. They instantly become unobtainable artifacts. The cost of acquiring them goes from $20 to an impossible expenditure of time, friction, and physical risk. The men who successfully navigate structural collapse do not survive because they move faster than the panicked crowd. They survive because they refuse to be on the track when the starting gun fires. They acquire the time buffer and the decentralized capability when the shelves are full and the prices are stable. I do not ask you to take my analysis on blind faith. I want you to test the retail algorithm yourself. Go to your local big box retailer this week. Walk down the hardware aisle or the pharmacy section. Check the current shelf availability and the exact price of a standard 16-ounce propane canister or a generic bottle of pediatric acetaminophen. Drop that precise price point and your zip code in the comments below. We are going to use this network of observers as a real-time, decentralized macroeconomic barometer. We will map the localized inflation and the supply chain friction happening right now, long before the mainstream financial press realizes the terminal valves are freezing. I read every single data point you provide. The infrastructure is deeply fragile. The geopolitical pressure is mathematically converging on May 1st. The window for effortless preparation is currently open. Decide exactly where you want to be standing when it snaps shut.